Good evening, everyone. We are continuing with In Divine Friendship, collection of letters by Swami Ananda. This evening, my musical friend is taking a couple of days of seclusion, so all you get is me tonight. We'll miss him, but we'll survive. He'll be back, I hope, next week. Okay, let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your presence, to be guided by your wisdom, to be uplifted by your love. We are your children. Lead us to our divine home in thee. Om, peace. Amen. Let's take a few minutes of meditation now before we begin. Om, peace. Amen. So, we are still in the section called Ananda, and we finished that very long letter to Ananda leaders and sort of went on past that, but so now we have a lot of, I think most of these are pretty serious letters. So this is written in December 14th, 2004. 2004, Swamiji moved to, this is December 2004, he left Italy and went to India in November of 2003 and pretty much lived there full-time for many months. I don't specifically know whether in December he'd gone back to Italy or America or was still in India, but that was the period of his life. It was the last years. And this is saying working effectively means working in harmony. Now, why would there have been any exodus? I don't know if there was any specific exodus from Ananda in 2004. All of the litigation was over. There was no other crisis. But this letter is about a couple who have left Ananda, and they left in a disharmonious way. And Swamiji's talking in general about that. Working effectively means working in harmony. And it's written to dear ones, which means it was a group letter to some people, but I don't know who. The Swami writes, dear ones, the couple who have left are convinced they have their own personal interconnection with Master, which is a good thing for every disciple to develop. So Swami starts by saying what's true, because the couple, as you'll see, have justified everything based on the fact that they have to have their own relationship with Master, which can mean they don't want anybody else to interfere with that. And Swami has to say, yes, of course, you have to have your own relationship with Master. You can't dispute such a point. When the inner connection one feels, however, puts him out of harmony with the inner connection others feel, or with their own sense of Master's inner guidance, I think such people owe it to themselves above all, but also to those others, to go off to where they can develop their connection with Master on their own. Excuse me. So Swami's setting the whole scene. The couple has left, whoever they are. They're leaving because they feel they have to develop their own connection with Master. Swami says, great. He says, but if developing your own connection with Master puts you out of harmony with what other people feel is their connection with Master and their inner guidance for him, then you need to take yourself to a place where you can develop your own relationship. In other words, if you're out out of tune with all the other disciples around you, and you want to strongly assert your own right to your own point of view, you have to think about where do you really belong then. So then he said, it would be wrong to continue to march together while out of step with the others. In other words, if you don't agree, then why are you staying with them? And if those others are trying earnestly to develop their own discipleship, should those departing do so with criticism? I don't think so. So see, now we're getting to it, because what I think happened is whoever this couple is, they left saying that the people at Ananda don't know what Master wants, or they're not really trying to develop. But what's happening is they're out of tune with the way the others are seeing it, and so out of integrity, they need to pull away. They shouldn't just stay there if they don't agree and don't feel in harmony. But if the others are sincerely trying to do what you're claiming your right to do, why would you criticize them? You know, why would you leave with criticism? We don't agree, but why would you criticize if people are sincere? No one way is the one and only right way. Again, Swami, he's just very generous. This is the way the majority of people in our community feel guided, but that doesn't mean there's no other right guidance in the world. These are people who are sincerely trying, our community, sincerely trying to develop an attunement with Master. We've collectively come to these ideas. If these ways of doing things seem wrong to you, it's perfectly fine. There's no way that's one right way. We don't all have to do it together. But if you are going to be here, and this is the way it's being done, you have to think about whether or not this is the right place for you. No one way is the right way. True disciples, especially, should be tolerant of other ways from their own. I think they, too, should show respect for all. So this is the same question. Why would you criticize? If you're a true disciple and other people disagree, why does that matter to you? I mean, why do you have to make everyone like you? It may be disappointing, it may be inconvenient for you not to be able to continue because you've fallen out of step. But is there any reason to be critical or intolerant? It may be a sad fact, but it's still just a fact. Too often in my life, Swami writes, I've seen a few dissonant voices succeed in getting others to agree with them in their negativity. Anyone drawn into that will find himself taken away from Master's work. So this is where it gets to it. Swami says, and this, I've seen it too. People, I don't feel in tune with what you're doing. I don't like what you're doing. We should all get together and rebel against what's being done. And Swami says, I've seen it. A few negative voices can suck others into their vortex of negativity. But then Swami says, anyone drawn to that will find himself taken away from Master's work. There will be no necessity for telling them to leave. They will not be allowed by Master and Divine Mother to remain. I have seen this same scenario play itself out all too often on the spiritual path. Now that is quite a statement, which is if a couple of negative voices start creating a negative vortex, and that vortex is really out of tune with what Master wants, some way or another, Swami said, those people will be compelled out of the community. And he says, I've seen it happen a lot of times before. This is not in this letter. It may have been way back at the beginning. But there was the man named Jim who was such a negative voice. Well, he remained a negative voice all the way through the litigation years. But there was a point at which he was really beginning to become this kind of person. A strong negative voice that was drawing others into his vortex. And Swami prayed to Master that, this is not tolerable. And the next thing that happened is he left. And Swami told us that he'd prayed to Master about the problem he was creating. Later it became that Swami had driven the man out. Swami said, I didn't have to drive him out. He said, Master took him out. That's just, that's just really, Swami states that he doesn't usually say things like that. But in this particular instance, he has said it. He's written it in this letter to a group of people. He allowed it to be published in this book because this was published during his lifetime. And he's just stated it as a fact. Master protects his work, is what he's saying. Swami never says things like that, rarely, because they're so easily misinterpreted. So that's why Swami starts this whole thing by saying there's no one right way to do things. Everybody should have their own relationship with Master. But if you're standing in the middle of Ananda and you're actively and energetically trying to dissuade other people from following essentially the directions that Swami has set and that we're in tune with, and you're actively trying to dissuade them, Swami says you don't have to ask them to leave because Master will make sure that they do. And he just states it unequivocally. And he, as I said, he rarely would say things like that. So it's very interesting that he did. There is no harm in reflecting, both inwardly and as a group, on what would be salutary and possible for us to correct. And now, this is also, the reason this is written to a group, there must have been, the criticism of this departing couple must have sort of gotten a few people to think we need to have a day of introspection to think what we've done wrong. Why are these people not happy here? What might be false? This has happened on more than one occasion, where a few voices sort of feel like we have to have a day of penance. Because these people are unhappy, we must be doing something wrong. Swami rarely gives any energy to that. He can tell the difference between helpful suggestions and negative energy that is not genuinely interested in uplifting, but only interested in pulling down. And there's, it's an instinct that you develop. It's obvious to many people, and then and others are oblivious to it. So it's an acquired leadership skill to be able to tell the difference between helpful suggestions and negative criticism. Yeah, so I'm just going to leave it because it's hard to explain. So Swami says there's no harm in reflecting, both inwardly and as a group, on what would be salutary and possible for us to correct. But we can only work together effectively if we work in concert, in harmony, and not in dissonance. And that's what the point of this letter is. We can't sort of come together with confrontational energy. We have to come together because we're all on the same side and we're just trying to make what we're doing better. And this is, again, where it's sort of the nuances of somebody who's really committed to helping and someone who's just, what the only word is for it, a negative voice that's just trying to get its way and create dissonance. We can only really be effective if there's a sense of unity. We can't be effective if there's a sense of confrontational difference. That's just not Ananda. There are communities that thrive on confrontational differences, but that's not our way. I mean, this is related, but for a period of time in the early years of when I lived in Ananda village, for a season or so, I was on the elected village council. And there was some issue, I don't remember what it was, and we simply couldn't really come to an agreement. It wasn't clear to us what we should do. But we never considered voting. It wasn't like 7 like it and 3 don't, so we're going to do it. It was like, if we can't harmoniously and collectively feel what it is that we're supposed to do, it's not time to make a decision. We have to, now it's not that we worked for consensus, because consensus is a whole different way of operating. That's really not how Ananda operates. Someone actually called it a dharmocracy. It's not a democracy where you just have the majority get their way. A dharmocracy is where we all work together to feel what the dharma of a situation is. And if we don't have clarity on what the dharma is, then we have to keep working for that so that we'll know that what we're doing is the right thing to do. And that doesn't mean that everybody has exactly the same opinion, but it means that everyone feels that in this circumstances it's the right thing to do. And sometimes what that means is, if I were in charge, I might do it differently, but this is you're the one who's really responsible for this, so I support you in doing what you think is best. So in consensus is we all have to have the same idea about what we're going to do. In a dharmocracy, we have to feel that the decision is an honorable one. And honorable means if that's how you really want to do it and you have the responsibility, then I support you in trying it your way. If it was my responsibility, I might do it differently, but it is yours and you think this will work, so I'll support you. And if we can't even come to that, and I remember in those village council meetings, I and others, I said, well, let's just meditate on it for this week or whatever it is, and when we come back together, we'll see. And I would say without exception, we always end up coming, as Swami says, so we can work in concert, in harmony, and not in dissonance. And whatever was being presented by this couple was not creating harmony, it was creating dissonance. And you see, Ananda runs a little differently. It's on one hand, yes, you have to have your own point of view, you have to have your own relationship with Master, but if you find yourself too far outside what the community is doing, either you just have to come to peace with that and realize this is still my family, these are still my people, or you have to integrity, you have to go somewhere else. You can't stay there and keep undermining it. When in the very early years, and I've read letters about that earlier, when Swamiji's leadership, oddly, was still really in question. Sometimes I have to say to people the most obvious thing. You don't go into a company. I mean, if you're working, I don't think Apple Computer existed at that time, but if it had, you don't go to Apple Computer and say that Steve Jobs, the founder, the energy, the CEO, the man who defines the whole company, I don't like him, I don't want to work for him. You just don't do that. If you join that company, you know what you're joining. And when people join Ananda, they know what they're joining. They're joining this particular expression of Master's work. And you can't fundamentally buck that. And that's sort of what's going on here. I know in the course of, more recently than 2004, talking to a person, an Ananda person who had really strong feelings about something that was going on, and their feelings were very different than the direction that the community was taking. And I said to them, that person, similar to here, yes, you have to think for yourself, you have to have integrity in your point of view, but I could see what might happen. I said, but you have to think really carefully whether this issue is important enough to you to put you at odds with your whole family, with your whole spiritual family. And if it is, then you have to do it. But it's I want to use the word dangerous. You risk a lot when you take a stand on an issue that is, he says here, to continue to march together when you're out of step with what people are doing. And so there may be issues that are worth it, but you have to really ask yourself whether it's worth it. Is it worth it to take a stand here? Partly because I have a Jewish background, and I'm not politically active, and politics in the USA and in the whole world are getting pretty wild. As a rule, I don't participate in politics, and although I've kept more informed recently because it's been so tempestuous, but I can go long periods of time without having any idea about it because it's just not my world. I feel changing consciousness is the way to accomplish what we are trying to accomplish in this world, so I work hard at that. But I always stay alert for what I call the rescuing the babies from the Warsaw Ghetto moment. That there really could be times when the moral issue is so profound that, if necessary, one stands alone. Or, I think of it more in terms of I would step into the political realm, whereas normally I wouldn't step into it. But the moral issue could be that compelling. So when I was talking to my friend about the point of view they were taking, which I knew was not the point of view that most of Ananda was going to take, is this that kind of moment? Is it important enough for you to potentially lose your spiritual home and your spiritual family over it. And if it is, it is. But be sure before you start. You can still disagree. You can say, I wouldn't make those decisions. But my Guru Bhais are deeply sincere, and they're trying as hard as I'm trying. And there's no one right way. This is what I would do, but what they're doing is valid in their own lights. Otherwise, you take a big stand, you speak out, you try to get people on your side, and pretty soon you're so dissonant that you may not want to be there, or Master may even remove you. He removes you in just certain ways by inspiring your mind. I mean, just making you feel like it's a good idea to go, because you need to move out. And it's also not good for you. He does it for the sake of Ananda, but he also does it for the sake of the person. That one gentleman named Jim that I mentioned, at one point Swami had a conversation with him and said, this man thought he was serving Master's work by trying to tear Swami down. It's just what he thought. Swami said to Jim, he said, if I were the devil incarnate, he said, it's just not worth it for you to be campaigning against me. He said, because it's not good for you. It was just like, why? Why bother? Just leave it in God's hands. It's not your job. But he was helpless in the face of the compulsion, although Swami pointed out, after that conversation, I don't think he ever really took a public stand against Swami again. He was long since out of the community. But I think he heard something. But, the man just walked out of the community on his own because he thought it was a good idea, so he did it. Master inspired him. Thank you. Okay, so now we're back to 1998, October. So the Bertolucci lawsuit, which was the sexual harassment lawsuit that we lost, which I've talked about a lot in previous days because the long letter to the leaders of the community were in relationship to that, and I know I gave the whole story. So the judicial misconduct in that trial was so egregious, even the plaintiff attorney was astonished by the prejudicial, in the plaintiff's favor, but by the prejudicial things that the judge did on a steady basis. He accepted them, he benefited from them, but it was preposterous, including that we weren't allowed to present a defense, which is kind of fundamental to a fair proceeding. We weren't allowed to present a defense on very important key issues. And plaintiff's witnesses knew that. I described all that. So the obvious thing to do would be to appeal, because it's an unfair verdict, and you can reversal on judicial error, judge not doing it correctly. It's a very easy way to get reversed, and everybody in the case, I don't know about the judge, but even the plaintiff side, and this is where I believe I said the phrase, that the verdict had the shelf life of an apple, meaning it just couldn't stand. It wouldn't have stood. However, as I mentioned, we were bankrupt, and the plaintiff's attorney had filed multiple other lawsuits. And then here's something interesting, which I hope you never have to learn these things, but we learned them all. When you go up on appeal, which is, of course, an expensive, long process by itself, you go up on appeal, and the appeals court says this was an unfair trial. What happens, it's remanded back to the same court and the same judge for a retrial. So all you get is another trial. You don't get this sort of victory dance and everything is erased and you're free. Now, of course, the plaintiff could decide not to try the case again. They could drop the case at that point. But in our situation, we knew they wouldn't, because they had endless money behind them and every reason in the world. So we would have gone back, even if we won the appeal, we would have gone back to the same prejudicial judge with the same horrible plaintiff's attorney, and it had been a media circus. We would go back to all that bad publicity. We would just go back to the same complete ordeal. That would be what we would win if we won an appeal. So we would just be condemning ourselves to literally hundreds of thousands of dollars more in expense and years more of the same chaos. So we tried to get some civil rights group of one kind or another to see that, to take the case on our behalf. I'm not even sure we actually got so far as to apply, but that was one of our ideas. We might have decided to drop it before we even got to there. So here Swamiji is explaining, just answering someone about why we're not going to go any farther. And Swami says, "What this lawsuit has done for me, if nothing else, is greatly deepened my conviction that I want God alone. Nothing, but nothing else matters. As for going up on appeal," because that's partly like it was and is to this day, 20 years later. It's a blot on our reputation and on Swamiji's reputation, because things on the internet never die. And papers that are filed in the context of a lawsuit are exempt from libel laws. So if you put it in a deposition, you can say anything you want. And so, so if you care to find out, you can get a very distorted perspective on Ananda and Swami. But, okay, nothing, so Swami's saying, all I want is God alone. I don't care about my reputation. That's what he's referring to. Nothing but nothing else matters. It just doesn't matter to me. As for going up on appeal, why ask for reconsideration by a system for which I, and I imagine we, have so little respect? We've won anyway, in the eyes of those who alone matter to us, which is people, well, I don't have to explain it. Were we to go for an appeal, we'd end up spending even more money, wasting lots more time, and merely risking a repeat of the same treatment we've had already. I don't think it's worth it to any of us. God is our judge. Why even bother to seek approval from the courts of this world? And that is the question we began to ask. I used a reference to Perry Mason in one of my talks, and everybody who's less than 50, which is a lot of people in the world, had no idea what I was talking about. But as a child, there was a black and white television show called Perry Mason, and he was an attorney, and it was either a 30 or a 60-minute show. And it was always some heroic theatrical moment, final moment in the courtroom when the truth comes out. And because I've mentioned over 12 years we had two separate lawsuits in two separate courts with two separate judges. And our first judge in federal court was superb. He didn't always rule in our favor because everything wasn't in our favor. But he was conscientious, and he was extraordinarily honorable, and he was in complete command of his courtroom. The second was just about as opposite as that could be. He was biased. He didn't have a clear sense of direction. He didn't have control of his courtroom. And it just was not Perry Mason. And prior to that, my picture of the legal system was based on television and movies, in which truth always comes out and the hero always wins. But we found out, oh, golly shucks, not true. So Swami says, God is our judge. Why even bother to seek approval from the courts of this world? And then he says, an appeal would be tantamount to our suing. We've never sued anyone. And he's right. And then we did file a cross-complaint in the Bertolucci lawsuit, which was a bad idea. Turned out to have been a really bad idea. And Swami said, I wouldn't have even submitted that counterclaim had I thought this through adequately then. He wanted it done to try to bring out the truth, but strategically it was naive. And strategically it was a bad idea, and it worked very much against us. In fact, it can only have been by divine will that things turned out as they did. Why not just accept that? That doesn't mean that we're guilty. That just meant we were judged guilty. At one point, everything everything in that case went against us. And I remember one day in the middle of it, Swamiji just said, somewhat thoughtfully and almost wryly, he said, the law of averages says that at least some things will go in your favor in any situation. He said, when absolutely everything goes against you, Divine Mother is behind it. And I thought that was really interesting because that's what happened. Just nothing went our way. Everything went against us. He said, it's just Divine Mother's hand. Why not just accept that? This world is not our home, and the lawsuit has helped convince us of that. So let's just be grateful and move on. I do think, however, that I will make a public statement on the subject, for otherwise, as the saying goes, silence gives assent in divine friendship. So Swami did write a long letter, like reflections on the lawsuit, and just at length talked about what happened, why it happened, what he thought about it. Just by the way, I have a small piece of good news, which I don't think I'm jumping the gun to say this. When I was working on the book Light Bearer, I had lots of resource material because Swamiji is a prolific communicator. Quite apart from the letters that are in this book, he's just written. He's written public letters. These are private letters mostly that are collected, but he wrote to Ananda, to our mailing list, to our worldwide mailing list. He wrote essays on many subjects. There's a huge amount of material, which is essentially the collected papers of Swami Kriyananda. And with the internet, where you can just post things, you don't have to print and publish. And I think we're about to start that project, where we're just going to work and make available to the public the collected writings of, collected papers was how we would call this. I mean, he wrote an essay about the novelist Ayn Rand. He commented on politics. He wrote about economics. I mean, there's just this huge amount of very interesting, just unrelated material. Plus, there's collections of major experiences that he and Ananda went through, where the discussion of them is in a series of letters, or newsletters, you might say, that he sent out to people. And there's no systematic repository of that. But, and this project could take many years, there will be. And I'm very happy to say it. So it will be that we could say, I'm going to make a public statement, and I could say to you, go to this website and look it up, which I think will be a lot of fun for a lot of people. Okay. So now, this was written in 1990, and it's on a completely different subject. Every so often, somebody would arrive at Ananda, and they would have some idea about how we were going to make a lot of money. And often it was a multi-level marketing system, where if we sold this product or did this thing, there was, in the early years of it, there weren't many of those multi-level marketing things. There was one. Now I can't remember the name of it, but the fundamental first product was laundry soap. And then you would sell laundry soap. And multi-level marketing means that you're at the top, and then these people all sell, and then a little bit of what the profit they make goes back up to you. And pretty soon the appeal of this is that you, quote, create a passive income stream. And that sometimes people were a little more grounded in these plans, and sometimes they were less grounded. Somebody just told us all we could make millions of dollars doing nothing, because somebody else would always do the work, and then we would just get the money. And Savitri, with her Texas accent, kept raising her hand in the discussion and saying, but who's going to buy all the soap? So over years, that sort of became the question that you ask when somebody's trying to tell you that you're going to get a lot of money without much work. And you just ask in a Texas accent, but who's going to buy all the soap? And so that's sort of what Swami's addressing here. I don't think the product in this case was soap, but whatever it was. Swami writes, we've given serious thought to your proposal, and we feel it just isn't our thing. Thank you for thinking of us. We know you had our interests at heart. Our logical objections to the proposal, however, are several, And these are in addition to our instinctive feeling on the matter. We've received other invitations to join in what you've called pyramid schemes. No matter how valid the project, and some of the products offered do seem worthwhile, we resist on principle anything that has profit as its prime focus. Our lives are dedicated to the principle of service. This means giving to others and not thinking of gaining from them. Naturally, one must gain also to survive. Everything we do, however, and even more particularly so, everything I do, Swami's writing, is focused on rendering spiritual service, In our stores, we sell many things, from health foods to dresses, but even there, our minds are focused on serving God through others. In my case, my work is entirely directed toward consciously sharing our spiritual teachings with others. I don't really believe that any other way would work for me. And Swami, as I mentioned before, he's been absolutely loyal to that. Even if we were to reach out to the general public with your product, and I'm sure it's a good product, I would not want to charge them a price that would continue to guarantee me an income purely on the strength of the work a subsequent network of distributors did for me. I'd rather let those distributors have their own contact with the company. If I'm going to profit from a work, I like to feel that I've also done the work. So that was the principle he laid out there, which is completely opposite of the way many people think, especially in those multi-level schemes. More is involved, however, also almost necessarily so. The people I work with are my friends. The strength of our relationship is one of mutual trust and love. It would be a betrayal of that trust to seek to involve them in a scheme that was intended for mutual gain when our relationship is based on mutual sharing and love. They might indeed buy from me if I asked them to, but then no, I would never ask such a thing of them. You see the point? This is one thing that Swami really objected to, is that you make your friends, you take people who are your friends and you shift it into their making money for me. Swami just didn't feel it was the right relationship for Ananda folks to be in with each other. So, thanks for your offer, but the mindset of this community isn't compatible with this kind of venture. I speak, you see, not only for myself, but for Ananda as a whole. He really felt it was really the wrong direction for us to get into. Again, let me stress that I consider the product itself to be worthwhile, and I wish you continued success in your efforts. So that never went anywhere. Every one of those got dropped. Okay, this one is, still we're talking about money and business. This is February 2001. And I don't know what this proposal was. I never saw it. But he says, thank you for sending me the proposal. I want to say that I don't want my name, or for that matter Ananda's name, associated with worldly attitudes. Once we feel we must compromise who we are in order to make money, we have already started down the road that certain other spiritual organizations have taken. Not necessarily a bad road, but a betrayal of the ideals Master brought to the world. If I knew what the proposal was, I could be more helpful here, but I don't. So whatever it was a money-making scheme. See, so, people at Ananda have done business. We have had construction companies. There are people who are privately employed in various ways. I'm trying to think of what other businesses we've had. Most of the businesses in the construction companies have been and are, you build something for someone, you're really helping them. I mean, it's not teaching them Kriya, but when you come in and build something or fix something or remodel something, you're very intimately involved with people's lives in something that is extremely important to them. And with the right attitude and the right consciousness, you can enormously contribute to their well-being. And also, good building is an enduring contribution to the good of society. Laundry soap is essential, but it lacks it lacks the depth of value. It's just a commodity that is an essential commodity. Growing good, healthy, organic food and making it available to people. Running, as we do, a small market. And even, we did run in town for a period of years, I say we, in Nevada City, from Ananda Village. We had a health food store and cafe, which has an obvious benefit to people, especially then when health foods were not as commonly available, and where a good vegetarian cafe was not available. So we were pioneering in a very positive way. Plus, it was a very direct service. You make good food for people, you serve it to them with grace and affection, you can create a very uplifting atmosphere. And the other store, though, was primarily a women's clothing store, but it was a beautiful store and had beautiful things in it. And it made people very happy to shop there. And then they walked around town or around Ananda in these just lovely things, not luxurious, not overdone, just beautifully and tasteful. And the women who ran the store, formed a lot of very positive relationships with a lot of women in the area. And so even though the product was, you might say, it wasn't extravagant, but it wasn't a life essential, the spirit with which it was done was to uplift and to add beauty to the world. So, whatever this proposal was, whatever it was, it just didn't have any redeeming qualities. It was just going to make money. And Swami didn't want Ananda to be associated with something that was just there to make money. He said it would be a betrayal of the ideals of Master. For myself, Swami says, I am in the happy position of being able to say that everything I've ever written is sincere. Never mind what others in the industry are doing. Let's always be ourselves. Let's be true to our ideals, and everything else will follow. No context. I don't know any context for that one. People before profit. And this is May 4th, 2000. Now, Crystal Clarity Publishers, which is Ananda Publishers, went through this big experience of getting associated with Time Warner Books, and I've talked about that in other contexts, and it took us down a road of thinking that we could be a big cheese in the publishing business, and that we could make a lot of money as publishers, and we could be recognized. The energy just went in a direction that Swami really felt was wrong, and the whole effort collapsed because Swami was not going to be a popular author. It just wasn't going to work. And in fact, it ended up some hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. It was a kind of a tough cycle. So now it's May 2000, so that whole cycle is finished, but it's not that far in the past. I've certainly no objection to Crystal Clarity Publishers turning a profit, Swami says, with an exclamation point, so we make sure we get it. It's not that he's trying to lose money. I mean, he was always trying to write books and sell them as a way of supporting Ananda, because he's practical. He writes in other places, it's not that I don't want to make money, because we need to make money. Everything requires money. I just want to do it in such a way that our first goal is to serve people, and as a consequence of our right action and our right energy, the universe returns in support. It needed to be what Swami felt was an appropriate and an honorable exchange, in keeping with our values. He says, I don't object to it making a profit. I just don't want us to develop a commercial attitude to the degree, one, that we lose our devotion, both in ourselves and in our approach to the market, and two, that we fail to give adequate attention to our members, to increasing their number, and to reaching devotees above all, and others in the hope of turning them in the direction of becoming devotees. So Swami, he was writing these books, and he often would say this book could be popular, we can get a bigger market for this book. But his real intention was to serve those who had either the inclination or the potential to want God. That's who he came for. He didn't come just to make the average person slightly less average. He came to find devotees, those who really had come into this world to love God and help them to love God. Swamiji, it's either in The Path or somewhere else, he talks about when he was a college student, he had a cousin, he went to school at Brown University and some other place slips my mind at the moment, but two different universities, Haverford and Brown, that's where he went. And he had a cousin who went to Wellesley, and they would meet often because they were friends. And his cousin told him, she said that she really wanted to be a doctor. She wanted to help sick people get healthy. And even then, as a college student, before he'd met Master, Swami reflected on her saying that. She was trying to ease the suffering of people. And Swami finally had to say to her, he said, I'm not drawn to bring sick people back to health. He said, I want to take healthy people and make them super well. Even at the time, even though he didn't have self-realization yet, he knew that he needed to work with people who were seeking something profound, because that's what he was seeking. That was his way of serving. And there's nothing invalid about another way of serving. It's just his way of serving. And certainly all of us who are part of Ananda, as well as Ananda itself, and I'll speak for myself in this, one can't do everything. So one has to decide, what am I really drawn to do? For a very brief period of time, I tried to do work in corporations. And I had a very brief period of positive results, but it became very obvious very soon, I just wasn't born to do that. And it wasn't my talent, it wasn't my inclination, it wasn't my joy, that I have had a certain knack for helping to introduce and bring people to the path, but I don't have any knack for people who are not there. And yet, friends of mine have had a fabulous 20-year career doing all kinds of corporate training. And they teach them to meditate, principles from the Bhagavad Gita. They don't identify the Gita necessarily because they have to go a little incognito to do it. But they've probably taught more people to watch the breath and meditate than almost all the rest of us combined. But it's a certain population. They love serving that population. It's their destiny. So Swami is also saying here about what is the purpose of crystal clarity. And he says later in this letter, it is up to him to decide, because that really has been his project. And so he says, we're really here to serve Master, to find the devotees and to help the devotees. And I don't want our publishing company to become so interested in this would be profitable, because finding and helping devotees, Hindu Way of Awakening, is a more esoteric book. Crises in Modern Thought is a more esoteric book. Even Revelations of Christ. I mean, these are books for people who are thinking spiritually, not just thinking about a little bit of dumping a little stress, as someone put it to me once. I mean, that's not. It's a deeper. But those books are not going to ever be as profitable, because out of 1,000, only one seeks God. And if you can get a popular thing, you'll get more money. But Swami says, I don't want us to be doing something that doesn't inspire us, where we lose our devotion. See, what happened to me when I was in my brief, it was about a nanosecond long, when I was in my brief corporate career, I wasn't inspired by what I was doing, because I was helping those people. It was nice to help them, but the kind of help they were able to accept from me, I didn't feel like it was what I really had to give. I could talk some good common sense about getting along with people or being less stressed or something. I had something to say, but it wasn't what I wanted to say. But if I'm in a room full of people where I'm standing in front of the masters and I can talk about meeting Swami Kriyananda, then I have a lot of devotion for that. And that's just a decision that everyone has to make. People will come and want to do certain kind of work or want Ananda to. I said, well, we have to make decisions. We have to choose. We can't do everything. We have to choose what to do. That's what he's saying about crystal clarity. We have to choose. Sales, for sales' sake, would be a mistake. But successful sales, less for the sake of Ananda's income than for reaching people with the truth, of this I approve heartily. Let many millions come to us that way. So again, it's clarity of thought. Muddy thought leads to confusion. Swami just wanted the principles to be clear. But if a great deal of income comes from the selling of books that Swami has written sincerely and totally stands behind, for a brief period of time, a few years, he had these little books, small books, secrets books. We had 18, I think, by the time we were done. Secrets for men, secrets for women, secrets of peace, secrets of love, secrets of friendship. And they really sold really well for a while. We had the sort of new age aphorism market to ourselves for a few years. Oddly enough, no one else was in it when we started. And those books did really well. And that was great, because they were really good books. Swami meant every word of it, and for a little while they were popular. And that was wonderful. So no objection. So, and now this is a related one, also about crystal clarity, and this is 1998. And he says it's about on relying on marketing experts to sell our books. Swami says the whole point of a cover, there's some kind of discussion now, we've gotten some expert advice about how we should design things. I sort of remember when this was happening. The whole point of a cover is to sell the book. The problem lies with the thought that marketers, as such, have a special corner on common sense. Swami was never a respecter of a person just because they had a title. He respected them if they had good ideas. I've learned over the years to be highly skeptical of so-called experts. We should keep carefully in mind the fact that this marketing view was what nearly ruined crystal clarity before, because people were saying, well, we've got to basically cater to the market. We need this kind of book, we need this kind of sales, instead of thinking, what do we have to offer? I remember once there was a person involved with Ananda who was sort of relying too much, Swami felt, on experts. It doesn't matter. This man from Southern California, his name was Norman Seif. He may still be doing the work he did. And this was might have been as late as the 80s. It could have been, I think it might have been the 70s, late 70s. And Norman was a photographer in Hollywood. He was well placed in Hollywood. And he actually did the photography and the design for popular music groups. And he was actually responsible for some very big names. He was very skilled and very well placed. And he came and just out of love for us, did a photo shoot with Swamiji. And for a number of years, we had these wonderful black and white photos of Swami. Very professional, very dynamic. They were all because Norman did them for us. And they appeared in various of the things that we did. So the head of the publications at the time was trying to be more professional, and she was sort of looking into how things were done. And you'll see, we were taking these pictures for the purpose of some product. It was probably a book, and she had been schooled in the idea that we should put out 3 different covers and see which one sold best, and then commit ourselves to that cover. So she thought Norman would support her because he was a professional. And Norman said, why would you let the man on the street tell you who you're supposed to be? He says, what does he know about who you are? He said, you have to decide who you are, and then you have to present it with commitment. Complete opposite of the market research that most people do. He said, they have no idea who you are. They'll just pick according to their own preferences. That's not what you want. And that's what Swami was talking about, where you just do it just for sales without any sense of your own, who am I and what do I have to offer? Because we'll make more money if we cater to the existing taste. But the whole definition of Ananda is that we have a new reality to offer people. And it's interesting because that was also very strongly the philosophy of Steve Jobs. And, famous remarks, I never knew the man, even though I live right here, just a few miles from where all of that happened. But I've read about him, and he's interesting. People would encourage him to do market research and find out what people wanted. One of his famous quips was, well, they don't know what they want. I haven't invented it yet. And just, why would I ask them? Because they only know what they already know. I know what they don't know yet. And so I will tell them. And of course, Apple and Steve Jobs single-handedly changed the whole planet because he knew who he was and he put it out there. And he didn't listen when people told him, you have to choose your colors with market research. No, he just said no. And he was inspired by Master. He knew Master, and he knew the autobiography was very dedicated to Master, so it's very interesting. A lot of power came into him because he was one of the most influential creators of Dwapara Yuga from the technical point of view. And he also is a vivid example of what Swami's talking about, outside of Ananda, to help just get the picture. So he said, often the experts justify that famous saying which Master loved to quote, "The operation was a success, but the patient died peacefully on the operating table." Their very claim to expertise is the fatal flaw of egotism that eventually proves its own undoing. The operation was success, meaning that whatever the doctor did to the body, he did it beautifully. And he kind of lost track of the fact that the idea was to keep the patient from dying. But the operation went well, and meaning you become so involved in yourself. Swami uses the word egotism, which is a fatal flaw. You're so involved in yourself you can't even tell. And of course that's not true of all experts, but it can be. Swami talked about when his father was an oil geologist, that his father was out in the field of some country like Egypt or Romania or Mexico, wherever he was working. And the guy came from the New York office. This was like in the 1930s. The guy came from the New York office, just kind of walked out into a place he'd never seen before, said, "Drill over there, that's where the oil is." And there was no oil over there. He was just from the head office, and he thought he knew everything because he was. And Swami has often used that as an example, that it's just, you have to use your common sense, not just have people declare that they know. We've been drawn down this road before. It didn't work for us. I don't say the direction itself is wrong, which is to say to research and get good advice. What makes it wrong is the competitive emphasis. Merely to be a marketing person doesn't guarantee that you know what you're talking about or that you'll be right every time. Experience is a liability often, for it can prevent you from welcoming, or at least being open to, new ideas. The bottom line here is that we do have something finally that works. And this was, Swamiji had gotten a design team. This was all about covers for the books. Swami had gotten a design team that would consistently express Swamiji's ideas of what the cover should be. And our sales were good. But Swamiji's ideas of what the cover should be and the artist's expression of that did not always match what the experts said we needed. But Swami says, finally, we have something that works. Why tinker with it? I'll go with anything that works well if it also expresses our spirit and the spirit of the book. And then parenthetically he says, which there, meaning Time Warner's book, Secret of Life, failed to do. So I brought Secrets of Life because I thought it might be interesting to see. So this was the cover that Swami was talking about, that he felt it's clean, it's bright, it maybe fit the marketer's idea, but Swami just didn't feel it had anything that had the spirit of the book behind it. In fact, I've seen this very picture gets used all the time, this one drop of water falling into some kind of a thing like this. And Swami just didn't feel that it had any of the consciousness of the contents of this. What this book is, I'd refer to the Little Secrets books, the sort of New Age aphorisms. Time Warner thought, and it didn't turn out to be true, but they thought that they would take all of these, which is I think 16 or something of these, there's more, actually more than is on here, of these little books, each of which had 30 aphorisms, and put them into one full book like this. And it's a nice book. I mean, I actually really like it because it has all the different ones, and you can read about success and happiness and friendship and self-acceptance, but it was a dud in terms of the market. And Swami just thought, you know, any one of 1,000 people could put a cover like that on a book. And he just didn't feel it said anything about what we are. This is my own, I had a mentor in marketing, and he helped me some. And so I have some ideas about it. But I've always felt that there's nothing on the planet like Ananda. It's just unique. And there's certainly no one like Swami Kriyananda. There's basically no one like any of us, because what we're doing is really, really different than what anyone else is doing. I was sitting in a restaurant with a friend of mine, Seva, from Anand Village, and I just had this feeling sitting in there. It was a particularly, I don't know, there was a very Rajasic sort of worldly atmosphere. I said, if our physical appearance was as different from the people in this room as our thought processes and our values and our commitment and the way we live, I said we would look like monsters from another planet. People would be screaming and running out of the room, because we're 1 in 1,000. We're just, it's fine what other people are doing. I don't have any judgment, but it's not what I'm doing. And when we market Ananda, I have always tried to do whatever we do in such a way that no one else could do it, because no one else could sincerely present themselves with the attributes that we have, because our attributes are unique. So a book like this is very clean and very nice, but is there anything about it that says who Swami really is? And that's what he was talking about. Now, his own ideas, but he will, let me just sort of see for a minute, he'll like he commissioned Dana Anderson to do paintings for a while for covers, you know, where she's a unique, brilliant artist. And I don't know if you can see this just on the air, and you know, this is not a perfect rendition of what is really an exquisite painting, and up in the corner you have Master's eyes. So it's just has a spirit to it. And let me see if you can see it more clearly. This is also the Gita. This was the Indian edition. No, it's even worse here in terms of the reproduction. This is another one of Dana's paintings, an absolutely gorgeous picture of Christ. And this book, because now I'm pulling these books out, you know, look how lovely that is, Master standing. This is the biography of Master. Now, of course, once you have Master's picture and his name, you're going in another direction. But, you know, these have a real spirit to them that you can see. So just to, you know, to give you an idea, let me go down here and pick up my magnifying glass. So, I was just, yeah. Let me see, even this one. This also has Master's picture on it. You know, this is a little statue of Master. I'm not saying that everything is perfect, but you get the idea. It has a specific. So then he says, what does he say? So that was the secrets of life. But I will strongly resist so-called expert opinions that begin with the premise, you aren't a marketer, so you can't know what you're talking about. Swami just won't accept that. It's just not true. It may well be, and when he meets people who are humble and genuinely wise, he's always listening. Swami's very receptive. But when somebody would just come in and say, well, I've studied marketing and this is what you need to do, Swami just wasn't interested. It had to come with the right spirit. Common sense, not expertise, should be our guideline. For the present, at least, common sense should tell us that we have products finally that are doing well. Why not stay with them? So again, I don't know what was being suggested here, but obviously he didn't like it. Another even more important issue is we don't want the marketers telling us, but we can give you a product that will sell to a wider market. That was where our greatest trouble lay earlier. And then so-and-so and so-and-so wanted to break into the mainstream market with a product that isn't geared for that kind of market. I write another kind of book. So that was, the basic error. What we needed to do was recognize the simple fact and not try to compete with Warner or other big publishers. Disaster awaits us if we do. I am simply not a mass media author, and I have no desire to be. I have no wish at all to misrepresent ourselves for the sake of greater sales, and or to water it down. That was just to say to misrepresent ourselves. That's why I insisted that crystal clarity come under the umbrella of Ananda Church and not try to be something different. On this point, I do have final say, and I shall insist. Otherwise, well, I'm simply not interested. But I'll gladly accept any good cover idea that works, and for the right reasons. It's just that they haven't worked nearly so well, until now at least, as the covers we're now using. Give me a better idea and I'll go for it. But no one should try to sell an idea to me merely on the ground that an expert designed it. And interestingly, at the bottom of the heap, so I'm not going to pull it up again, but the Secrets of Life book, and I think that there was a previous letter in here, I'll remind you of it, and it was related to the book I just held up, Secrets of Life. And because it was being published by a major publisher, they had their whole system. So Swami turned in the manuscript because he took the opportunity in this book to expand on some of the aphorisms because the format allowed it. The other Secrets books were quite small and their words were more limited. So he went through it all and edited it all, turned the manuscript in, and then they gave it to their editors, because that's normally what happens. An author, the publisher, edits the book. So then the manuscript comes back to Swami, and the book was rewritten almost. There were so many changes. And there was a letter earlier, you may remember, where he wrote back, and thank you so much. I really appreciate, your effort on this. I'm not accepting a single one of the suggestions you made because what you're writing is not my book. I said what I wanted to say in the way that I wanted to say it. And what you have suggested is not my book. And he didn't say it, but I don't care if you're the editor for a big publisher. I know what I want to say, and I'm going to say it. And then I think he accepted one comma. He actually put in the letter that he accepted one comma. I think he was actually trying to instruct the editor too. Because if you had looked at Swami's book with any sensitivity, you could tell that this was a real writer who made conscious decisions. He wasn't a person who didn't know what they were doing, which many authors are. And it's not even to their detriment. They have the basic idea, maybe for a great story and great characters, and they'll let the editor polish it for them because that's not their strong suit. But if she had looked, for some reason I think it was a woman, carefully at what Swami had done, you would say, I might not agree with this, but this is not a low energy product. I think that's one of the reasons Swami was so like this. You're not really doing your job. So, in any case, that's what he says. So, and then here's more about marketing. We're going to have a whole bunch of these. He was asked about an outreach effort. This might have been from us and from Palo Alto, but I'm not sure. An outreach effort where we said we were giving away a free CD. This was in the days of that sort of thing. And it had, maybe it was a Sunday service. Maybe it was a free CD of a Sunday service or something. I'm not sure it was us, but I think so. Should we use the reading from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam Explained or something more understandable to the average person? Swamiji edited part of the effect of all the litigation that we went through was certain original writings of Master were liberated for us to publish. The copyrights were in the public domain. As soon as that happened, Swami took the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, Master's commentary on that, and wrote, edited it into a publishable book, which I don't think I have here. But we, in order to get people's attention on it, we, for 2 years, at our Sunday service, instead of using the Bible and the Gita comparisons that we were using at the time, which was a much longer version than what we're using now, I was going to say, for several reasons, we used commentaries, we used sections from the book, the commentary on the Rubaiyat, and the whole Sunday service was given. The sermons were given from the Rubaiyat instead of from the Bible and the Gita, and we did it for 2 years here, which is what makes me think that was. I think everybody at Ananda did it actually, for 2 years. The other reason we did it was because the readings that we were supposed to read were very long, and I had a deep rebellion against them because they were so long. They were good, but they were very long, so it was a lot of reading, and I was glad to be relieved of that. And then after 2 years, Swami wrote a shorter version, which is the one we use now. So the Sunday service sermon would be based on the reading from the Rubaiyat. And I think what the deal was is that we were putting out a free CD of our Sunday service. But the sermon wouldn't make sense unless you had also seen what the reading was. So the Rubaiyat would be considered a little obscure. Maybe we should do something more popular. Details are not clear to me. Dear whoever, we're trying to win devotees, not just large numbers of members, because that was the point of the CD, was to get people interested in our church. The kind of people we want to attract are those who will love the Rubaiyat reading. The others, well, we're happy to serve them to the extent that they want it, but they'll never be our own. I say, let's go with the Rubaiyat. So here he's responding to exactly what I was saying earlier. You know, the Rubaiyat is a profound and a deep scripture. Many people don't even know what it is or wouldn't appreciate the poetry, what to speak of the commentary, which is very, very deep, and it's not popular fodder. But Swami said, but we're using it every week. It's who we are. It's Master's commentary. It's Swamiji's great contribution to Master's work. If people can't embrace that, Swami says, they're not our own. So we just have to decide who we are, be ourselves, and see what happens after that. So it was a very important comment. Oh, look, this is the last letter in the section. No good thing can thrive without opposition. That's what this letter is. I thought we were out of the opposition section, but I guess we're still in it. May 2nd, 1996. Thank you for your letter. I am touched by the thoughts and feelings you express. I must say I endorse them. I don't know what he's talking about. Let's see. To me, Ananda is the most wonderful place on this planet, so that must have been the letter he got. I suppose it is inevitable that people will try to destroy it. Isn't that an awful thing to have to say? But that is the truth of this planet, isn't it? No good thing can thrive without opposition, which serves the purpose of strengthening its own will to grow and expand. This is like whenever there is a tremendous amount of light, there just seems to be a shadow congregation, a congregation of shadow forms that come in this world during this yuga at this time. It's a very mixed bag of a planet. And it's early Dwapara Yuga, and early Dwapara Yuga is a very mixed bag of a planet. Swami, once talking about Satya Yuga, still said, still the material plane, it's not God realization. But his words were, but people like us are in charge. And I said, so the whole world operates like Ananda? He said, yes. But we're not there. And even then, it's still the material plane where opposition arises. Virtually every, I would say every, if I could say it with firmness, but seemingly every great spiritual work also had enemies. I mean, of course, Jesus Christ is the most famous. He was crucified. But almost all the apostles except John were also martyred in one way or another. The disciple Thomas that Jesus himself sent to India, and Jesus had done 18 years of ministry in India. The lost years of Jesus he spent in India and in Egypt, and he was ministering there. But the Orthodox priest opposed him because he was bringing a new revelation. Thomas did great work and established the teachings of Jesus in India. That's why, in the South especially, there's a strong devotion to Jesus among Indians. But Thomas was eventually martyred. The king, who had been his ally, became his enemy and had him assassinated. It's just like, it just happens over and over again. And in Ananda's history, certainly, we've been continuously opposed. And he says, but the point of it is, you see, it makes us strong. When we were in when we were in the middle of that litigation, and I have to keep talking about it because it was so important for spiritual growth, and it demonstrates so much. A local free newspaper, 1998, it was just launching in the area. And it just picked up, the Swami's, the story of the Swami. And every day it was a daily paper. And for many days we were on the front page of the paper with the worst possible, photographs and stories. It was just unbelievable. We'd sort of get up in the morning and make our way down to the local outlet where we could pick it up. And if we were not on the front page, we were so happy. But it was a marvelous experience because it was the same Ananda that I'd always been part of. It was exactly the same that I had always loved, and I loved it just the same. It was just being vilified in the local rag. And, it was a very interesting story, and the local rag got kind of a good start because of it. But nothing had changed. I was just being vilified. We were just being vilified. So it's one thing when everybody thinks you're great. It's quite another when you're being publicly criticized and everyone thinks that you're scum. What do I believe? Am I only in this because everybody else tells me it's good? Or am I in this because I myself know what I'm doing? And when people would come to talk to me, I never tried to convince anyone. I would give people lots of information. I would tell them everything that I knew. But I never tried to convince them because I felt if I have to persuade you, then this is not for you. You have to know it from inside yourself. So persecution is wonderful for forcing you to decide what you really know to be true. And that's what I would say to people. I don't know, what do you think? What's your experience? Does any of that make sense to you? Is this the Ananda you know? Is this the Kriyananda that you've met? What do you think? And then I just sort of let it sit there. I was passionate because I believed in what I said, but I tried very hard not to be persuasive, just to be factual, because that's just the way it works. And otherwise, what's the point? Swami says, we are proud of what we have, for it is something given to us by God. Our Seattle community in particular has a chance now to grow stronger in divine light, in a spirit of service and self-giving, and above all in love. Swami mentioned them particularly, perhaps this was someone from there, but there was a lot of that whole period of time rattled that community, and there was a negative segment that grew up that tried to fight and eventually withdrew. I mean, some of the other letters were part of that. And so now that all of that had been decided and people there knew why they were there and believed in what we were doing, Now it can really change. But without that challenge, you would have had people who were there for what they could get because it pleased them, and not so much for what they could give. And that's not wholesome. Like when, in 1976, when the forest fire burned down so much of Ananda and a lot of people lost their homes, everyone who was there, because it was a beautiful place to live and they had a nice house, when their houses burned down and the landscape looked like, just looked like, it was just, what do you say? It was gone. The trees were burned. It was just gone. It wasn't a beautiful place to live, and they had no home anymore. And then, at that point, Ananda no longer existed for them. So what was the point? And then there were others who also lost everything. But Ananda for them was the ideal and the dedication to Master. It wasn't that I have a nice place to live in a beautiful area. It was that I've given my life to God. And so nothing has changed. That's all. And so it's very, 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 very different. And if opposition doesn't come, you don't necessarily know where you stand. And you don't necessarily know where anybody stands. But when opposition comes, you find out what you really, who you really are, who the people around you really are. And then after that, you have so much power. I mean, that fire was a watershed moment. It's a long time ago now, but it was a very important watershed moment. When I was in charge of publications, and the fire was approaching where the publications building was. I think I remember saying all this to you before, but everything was physical at that point. There was no computers, no internet. And our mailing list was metal plates. And it was, I don't know how many thousands, but it was the way we stayed in touch with the world, was those metal plates. And I was with Seva and a few others, and we were running up the hill. I was a lot younger and stronger then, but we were running up the hill because the fire was coming down toward that building to evacuate. Other people were getting trucks and driving the trucks up, and we were running up the hill to start getting everything out. And I'm running up the hill, saying to Seva as we're running, first get the mailing list, because we're going to have to rebuild and we're going to need help. It's like in the middle of the fire, it never crossed my mind that we would be destroyed or that we would abandon. And later I thought about that. I thought, wasn't that wonderful? It wasn't premeditated or anything like that. It was, God has burned the whole thing down. We'll just build it again. We built it once, we'll build it twice. And that's really how you have to feel. Peter Caddy said, he was the founder of Findhorn. He came to visit Swami. Their temple had just burned down. This was in the 70s. Their temple just burned down again. Unbelievable, just a week ago. Arson again. Twice their major building has been burned by arson, twice in 50 years, but still, it's really awful. Swami expressed concern. I said this to you conceivably even last week. Expressed concern, and for Peter said, if they're not persecuting you, you're not doing enough good. He said, it's a great sign when they persecute you. They, meaning the forces that are against the light. If you're not bright enough to attract the opposition, then you need to work harder to become brighter. And since every great saint in the history of great saints has always had enemies, it's not personal. It's just light and shadow playing themselves out. And a wonderful opportunity to deepen one's own devotion and introspect and find out, what do I believe and why do I believe it? Again, when I would talk to people during those years, I would say, why are you in favor of Ananda? What do you believe? Are you just doing it because other people say so, or do you know it for yourself? And if you don't know it for yourself, you need to know it for yourself. And so it's wonderful. All of it's wonderful. It's not always easy, but it's always wonderful, because God is teaching us, and that's the only purpose of life in any case. So, my friends, God bless you.